it's very practical that if you want to understand a book, especially an academic or an academic article, to look at the introduction and then look at the conclusion. And they should correspond with one another to some extent and give us the basic idea of what the article or the book is about. Furthermore, of course, in the greater body of the book between these two ends, certain consistent theme will come up. And in this way, we can ascertain, in essence, what a book is about. Why do I bring that up? Because I and all of us really were introduced to Pujyapat Sridhara Maharaj through my Diksha Guru, A.C. Bhaktivedanta and Swami Prabhupada. No, he didn't write a book about Sridhara Maharaj. Everything he's said or ever written practically has been recorded and most of it published here, there, and everywhere. From books about his letters, books about his lectures, books about his books, his commentaries, and so on and so forth. So, in the context of his lectures, his conversations, and his letters, for the most part, there's a fair amount of material that is dedicated to or brings our attention to Pujyapada Bhakti Workshop Swami Maharaj. And if we look at the beginning of what he said and look at the end of what he said, then we get a very clear picture. And if we look throughout, we'll see a consistent theme showing up. We'll see one statement to the contrary would appear. I'll get to that, but the consistent theme is also apparent and corresponds with the beginning and the end. So the beginning, the introduction of to Guru Maharaj from Srila Prabhupada came early on when Prabhupada was in the United States preaching, and Achyutananda Swami, one of his disciples, was stationed in India. And he wrote to Prabhupada asking that he was feeling a need of association, invoked the term Siksha Guru, I believe, in his request. That's a term that, to be honest with you, most of us Prabhupada's disciples weren't that familiar with. Prabhupada was our guru, period. The idea that there could be a Diksha Guru and a Siksha Guru and that they could be different persons or different Vaishnavas, it really never occurred to us. That came into focus, however, for all of Prabhupada's disciples with the very slightly with the introduction that I'm referring to, and more so with the light of the concluding words that Prabhupada said about Sridhara Maharaj. So in the letter, when Achyutananda Maharaj asked for where he could go for association, and he may have even used the term Siksha Guru, but Prabhupada replied, of course, that my godbrother B.R. Sridhara Maharaj of Navadvip, what to speak of, what you can learn from him, I consider him my Siksha Guru. So that was a very big, if you will, endorsement of Pujyapat Sridhara Maharaj. It registered very deeply with Achyutananda Maharaj, who went there and spent, maybe half a year there in Sri Chaitanya Saraswati Math, while Prabhupada was still in the United States. And there was always something very special about Achyutananda that was a little different from other preachers and speakers and so forth. And he had this particular Gaur Leela and Navadvip kind of prominent influence, all coming, as we would come to find out, from Chaitanya Saraswat Math and Pujapad Sridhar Maharaj. But that was, a letter to Achyutananda. It pertained to him. We didn't necessarily see how it would pertain to all of us. Given that our situation, our circumstances were different than Achyutananda's, it applied to him. But it's quite a bit said there on the part of Prabhupada when he refers, even for that matter, to Sridhar Maharaj as his own Siksha Guru. Of course, that's an interesting concept. As I say, the Siksha Guru was something that we weren't so familiar with. The term is introduced to us in Chaitanya Charitamrita at the onset of the text in the very first chapter. In discussing the very first verse, Vande Gurun, Isha Bhaktan, Gurun is in the plural. Krishnadas Kaviraj, in his explanation of his first Namaskar verse, explains the concept of a Siksha Guru and a Diksha Guru. It's a very Gaudiya idea, the Diksha Guru, Siksha Guru. And he gives a very elevated explanation of the term by way of saying that the Diksha Guru and the Siksha Guru are one, equal manifestations of the Godhead, but they differ only in terms of function. So the Diksha Guru giving the mantra, for example, the Siksha Guru giving instructions, one being like an analogous to a seed, giving of the mantra, planting the mantra, and the other instructions, the watering of that. This is an interesting point to note, because sometimes it's said in some circles, even in some Gaudiya circles, that, for example, well, unless you're from a Brahmin family or from India, you can't be a Diksha Guru. You could maybe be a Siksha Guru, but not a Diksha Guru. However, as I'm pointing out, Krishnadas Kaviraj's explanation is that they're spiritually equal. Their functions are different. So the idea that one can water the seed, can't give the seed, it really doesn't show up. I had a discussion some time back, got trapped in one on the internet, regarding this issue. And these fellows, they were Gaudiyas, they were making the argument that Westerners could not be gurus. So I cited a verse from the Puranas, Sadkarma Nipano Vipro Manpratanta Visharda. If you have all the 6 good qualities of the Brahmins, but the verse goes on to say, Sadkarma Nipano Vipro Manpratanta Visharda. A Vaishnava Guru Nashad, Vaishnavasva Pacho Guru. But if you're not a Vaishnav, then you can't be a guru. Whereas if you're born in a family of dog eaters, but you're a Vaishnav, then you can be guru. So they said, well, that means Siksha Guru, not Diksha Guru. I explained to them that the verse is coming from the Puranas, where there's no mention of the term Siksha Guru whatsoever. In Bhagavad Gita, there's no mention of the term Siksha Guru. It's Guru, period. It's a very Gaudiya idea, is the point. And I think that historically, largely the term there, the concept employed as it has been in Gaudiya Vaishnavism, was often to make up for a possible lacking in terms of knowledge, or even in a minor sense, character of a Diksha Guru, that the Diksha Guru would continue to be honored, but whatever shortcoming, let's say in terms of knowledge, he had or she had, could be supplemented with a Siksha Guru, and that not that the Diksha Guru would be left, something to that effect. We see that in the Sampradaya. So anyway, it's it's a very Gaudiya concept. Now, how did it apply to Prabhupada? Prabhupada said he's my Siksha Guru. Hansaduta, the disciple of Prabhupada, was a prominent disciple, told me that Prabhupada told him that everything I learned from Sridhara Maharaj. So, of course, they stayed together. They lived together for 6 years. Prabhupada provided an apartment for Sridhara Maharaj to have as a base after the breakup of the Gaudiya Math, while Prabhupada was still in the household ashram. And you can imagine they had many, many sessions, and Sridhara Maharaj was very close to their Guru Maharaj, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, being in the mission, having taken sannyas from him, and so on and so forth, being as learned as he was. So Prabhupada didn't have the opportunity to have the close association with Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. And there was no internet, there weren't any recorded talks of Bhaktisiddhanta to be shared and so forth. So Sridhar Maharaj kind of filled in that way, if you will. And so Prabhupada had great regard for him. Now, that said, the term has, as I'm kind of explaining, different applications. I believe it can be used very strictly, as it's explained in Chaitanya Charitamrita, or it has been used very, in a more broader sense. I would say Prabhupada used the term with regard to Sridhar Maharaj in a broader sense, even though he said, everything I learned from Sridhar Maharaj. Still, he didn't have the same type of relationship with Sridhar Maharaj as he had with Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, who for both of them was like Dandavats, even at a distance, the great Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. And of course, Prabhupada manifested his own campaign and served independently, and he always had, I'd say, great regard for Pujapad Sridhar Maharaj, but he didn't have I want to say, it's possible that the Siksha Guru could become more prominent than the Diksha Guru, but Prabhupada didn't have that kind of relationship with Sridhar Maharaj. The broader sense of the term, of course, even within Gaudiya commentary, we find in Bhagavatam where it said that the Avadut learned from so many gurus. From the bumblebee, he learned this. From the redwood tree, he learned that. From the mountain, he learned. From the river, he learned this. And Jiva Swami commenting on that says that they served as Siksha Guru. So the Siksha Guru could be a bumblebee, could be one end of the spectrum and the other end of the spectrum, even more important in the life than the Diksha Guru. So Prabhupada had somewhere in between type of relationship with Sridhar Maharaj, but he said, what a speaker, but you can learn from him. I considered him my Siksha Guru. So it was a very, if we look back on it now, wow, that's quite a thing for Prabhupada to have said. We just had nobody else in our life to even think about as a guru figure than Prabhupada. So that's at the beginning. Now at the end, at the conclusion, and I was fortunate to be massaging his lotus feet when he said it. He was asked in the final days, really about a month before passing, that if he should come to pass from the world, which seemed imminent, was there anybody that we could take guidance from? And he said, actually, he was asked by a godbrother of mine, Tamal Krishna Maharaj, what we should do if he should pass away. How will we? You haven't taught us yet how to perform a funeral and a samadhi rites ritual for the passing of the guru. We don't know anything about that. So how should we do that? And then to that, Prabhupada replied that Narayan Maharaj and Navadvipi can advise. He had presided over Prabhupada's sannyas initiation, which was given by Bhakti Pragyan Keshav Maharaj, the guru of Narayan Maharaj. And Ram Maharaj was like, presided over the rituals, fire sacrifice. It must have been. So then Tamal Krishna Maharaj had the insight, or was pushed by the transcendental will to venture to ask, is there any, after you pass away, is there anyone else we can take advice from? Whoa, it would cause my ears to perk up. Well, that's an interesting question. Because at the time I didn't even think Prabhupada was going to pass. That just didn't fit between my ears or in my chest. So he said, and again I was there massaging his feet. He said, for philosophy, my God brother B.R. Sridhara Maharaj of Navadvip. I can just hear it now again, echoing, feel myself right there. For philosophy, my God brother B.R. Sridhara Maharaj of Navadvip. So that's the last thing he said about Sridhar Maharaj. And we've gone over the first thing he said. And in between those two ends of the book, if you will, of Prabhupada about Sridhar Maharaj, many other significant things that constitute a continued, repeated theme throughout his whatever he said or wrote about Sridhar Maharaj. Things like when Prabhupada invited him to come to his Chandrodaya Mandir and sat him on the same Vyasa-san with him, introduced him to the devotees at that time again, said he's a pure devotee. Another occasion when Prabhupada came back to India after being in the United States for the first time, he took the devotees to Sridhar Maharaj's mop, Chaitanya Saraswati's mop, to show them how to observe the Guru Puja on the day of Sridhar Maharaj's Vyasa Puja, the day of Sridhar Maharaj's appearance. So they went there, and there was the ceremony. Interestingly, Kinchana Krishnadas Babaji, another godbrother of Sridhar Maharaj, who had an affectionate relationship with Prabhupada, and Sridhar Maharaj was there, famous kirtanier, and he was singing, and after singing, I believe the Gurvastakam, then he chanted Jai Prabhupada, Jai Prabhupada, Jai Prabhupada, Jai Prabhupada, obviously referring to Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. And when the Prabhupada's, my Guru Maharaj's disciples heard it, they go, oh, that's very nice. And they asked Prabhupada, can we do that? Can we sing that, Jai Prabhupada, in kirtan for you? And Prabhupada agreed. So it's a very popular chant, if you will, especially in Prabhupada's institution at ISKCON. Just an interesting footnote as to where it came from. The inspiration to that came from the Chaitanya Saraswati Mata on the Vyasa Puja day of Prabhupada Sridhar Maharaj. One of Prabhupada's disciples, having visited the Math and also having had acquaintance with the Pragyan Keshav Maharaj's Math, which was right next door, Devananda Gaudiya Math, spoke to Prabhupada and gave, in his estimation, a comparison. I think he said, they're very organized.
Just like
the Devananda Gaudiya Math and Sridhar Maharaj is very deep, something like that. And Prabhupada replied to the effect that, yes, if you knew what we talked about, you would faint. Something to that effect. Of course, it's another famous statement, extended statement of Prabhupada concerning Sridhar Maharaj was that he went to visit Sridhar Maharaj later on in his manifest Bela and requested him that he would come to Mayapur. He said, I will build a hut for you, a kutir for you, a house for you, and there'll be an elevator so that you can go upstairs and have a bedroom upstairs, and you won't have to walk up the stairs. and then I'll bring people from all over the world are coming to my, more will come, and then they will be able to hear from you. That is my desire. Mm. And Sridhar Maharaj was like struck by that, thinking in his own mind, who am I? And he's so big, traveling all over the world doing this, and he's still very active. I am 80% blind. I can't practically move off my veranda. I don't know why Krishna's keeping me here. So he hesitated, if you will. And I can relate to that. My godbrother, he passed away quite some years ago, but what was his name? Hungarian devotee, sannyasi, had taken sannyas from Pujapad Sridhar Maharaj, disciple of Prabhupada.
I think that was also a Bhakti Narayan Maharaj.
Right, yeah.
Bhakti Abhay Narayan.
Bhakti Abhay Narayan Maharaj.
Yes.
So he was preaching in Eastern Europe. He was very active in Eastern Europe. He was Hungarian, and he liked me very much. I liked him, and he wanted me to come. And he said, "I will bring you to Russia, and I will introduce you to all Russian devotees, and you will initiate, and they can hear from you." It's kind of analogous, I mean, in a way, to what Prabhupada had said to Sridhar Maharaj. And I thought, you gotta be kidding, that's your field, you're traveling in incognito, sneaking across borders, in the Soviet Union, so on and so forth. And I'm so far away, how can, so I think Sridhar Maharaj reacted, naturally, kind of in a similar way with deference, for Prabhupada, but the desire of Prabhupada was very clear. It indicates how he felt about Sridhar Maharaj, the confidence he had in Sridhar Maharaj to be a guide for us. And we don't find him expressing that kind of confidence in anyone else by the same measure. And so it's worth underscoring these things. There's more things, I can't remember them all, but it's worth underscoring these to get the clear picture of Sridhar Maharaj's role, which of course became manifest in the lives of his Prabhupada's disciples and prominent, more so after the passing of Prabhupada, which is the time in which, of course, I came in touch with Sridhar Maharaj, which is kind of the last years of his manifest presence. I want to talk a little bit more about that, about the forming of his own math and mission, and his influence on my life and the life of some of Prabhupada's disciples. But prior to that, of course, speaking about him in general, now backtracking, if you will, to his own early life. He was born, I think, in 1895. And I believe he joined the mission of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur at about 30 years old. He, at that time, had a bachelor's degree in philosophy. He was an educated person, as was Prabhupada, as were many of the disciples of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. When Thakur published his Harmonist magazine, which was a reincarnation of Bhaktivinoda Sajjanatoshini, which was a Bengali journal, turned it into called the Harmonist and published it in English. Often his disciples who wrote for the magazine had letters, degrees, bachelor, PhD, master's degree, whatever, and he would have them. The byline, whatever, for the author in their secular name with their, with their letter bachelor's degree, and so for propaganda, for preaching, he took advantage of that, trying as he was and successful as he was in preaching to educated people in the British, who were still occupying India at the time. But yes, he had a degree in philosophy, and it came out very beautifully in his discourses, how he would touch base with Hegel or Bishop Berkeley or Nietzsche, who whose writings he was familiar with, connect with points that they had made with Gaudiya Vaishnavism and kind of show the universality of Gaudiya Vaishnavism. It was his way of, as I once said, I was asked by a godbrother of mine who had been hearing from another Vaishnav higher topics about Rasakatha, and then in terms of trying to share that with younger devotees, they were getting confused. So he asked me, how did Sridhara Maharaj talk about the higher topics in such a way that the devotees didn't get confused? I said, well, he didn't talk that much about higher topics. He did it very tastefully. A little bit of whipped cream on top, but I said his expertise was more talking about the lower things in the highest way. And he could talk about reincarnation, or that you're not the body. It's just like in ways that, again, touching base with Western philosophers and so forth, and just really bringing the point home and making a point that, I've heard that before. Like, I never heard that before, and which is how we should hear it. If we haven't realized it, we need to hear it more and more and more. So it was very characteristic of him. His acquaintance with Western philosophy was something that was, in the way he employed that in his discourses and so forth. I found that very compelling, very charming. Of course, charming he was with his speech. Devam dibitanum suchanda varanam. Very beautifully described in the Pranam mantra that we chant for him. Devam dibitanum, his divine body. Devam dibitanum, suchanda varanam. Suchanda, very beautiful poetic speech. Devam dibitanum suchanda varanam balarka chelanchita. And dressed, I always used to chuckle at this one, dressed in beautiful garments shining like the rising sun. Actually, he was more wearing the torn cloth of the Gaudiyas, as Prabhupada said. Prabhupada wrote like that. I think he wrote a letter maybe it was to Bhaktivedanta Narayan Maharaj, who was communicating with when he came to the United States, asking for Mridanga and help and so forth. And he said, I hear I have these facilities that have come by Krishna's grace to help me with my mission, but I long for Vrindavan and the torn cloth, the torn quilt of the Gaudiyas. I can't quote the whole thing, but it's just so endearing, so touching. And Prabhupada, we dressed Prabhupada in silk, silk and pashmina, and the best of the best. And he wanted his sannyasis dressed like fire, and looking very, in the context of wearing, for example, the sannyas attire, that they would look very paka, not torn cloth of the Gaudiyas, in Braj, for preaching would be the idea. But Sridhar Maharaj, in contrast, more exemplified. His cloth wasn't, at least to the naked eye, brilliant like the sun. It was tired, worn out, very worn out, and he was often not. Probably had us shaving. I used to shave every day, because that was a thing to do in those days. It's not the thing to do now. I understand that. You can see people even on newscasts with a little shadow, beard and so forth. So that's those times have passed. But when I was young, in my 20s, then the adults, males, they would shave every day. And you go, what? The people go, what? Shave every day. So I would shave every day, once a week, shaved head, shaved face every day. And I used to look in the mirror for that, of course, and I think this is how the gopis are doing, they're dressing themselves, only for the pleasure of Krishna. No vanity here, only because Prabhupada wants us to do like this, to set it, set a particular example. But Sridhara Maharaj was quite the contrast, to that externally, and more of the tattered cloth, the torn cloth of Gaudias. But Suchanda Badanam, anyway, beautiful, poetic speech. He would pull out those poetic kind of die to live, from Hegel, and then play it out. And we would be charmed by it, only to hear him say, yes, it's beautiful poetry, but it's a difficult pill to swallow. What does it mean? A godbrother of mine who close with both me and Sajjan put it on his license plate once. Markandeya, you may remember that. Die to live, you'd be better off throwing your car keys away, altogether to really apply yourself to what Sridhara Maharaj meant by it, and the example that he set of living by it, which that's just one of the many poetic kind of statements. But it brings to mind now, as we move forward with the discussion, brings to mind his mat and what was involved in establishing that mat. As I said previously, he was living with Prabhupada, had kind of a base there in Prabhupada's apartment, Prabhupada 2 apartments, and so one he lived in and one Sridhar Maharaj lived in. But he wanted, at that time, he developed a strong desire to reside in Navadvip, and he wanted to reside in substantially, essentially in Navadvip, not on the surface of Navadvip. And although he had done some outreach, some preaching from his base at Prabhupada's apartment, he was not initiating disciples. He was turning people away who wanted to be initiated, and qualified people. I'll give you an example. Prabhupada's own sister, Bhavatarini, who had received Harinam from Bhakti Siddhanta, but he had passed away before she received second initiation, wanted to take mantra diksha from Sridhar Maharaj, but he turned her away, not because of her lack of qualification. She was a perfect saint. Some of us got to know her and meet her and taste her cooking that was Prabhupada was very fond of. And her affection for Prabhupada was just so sky high. But he turned her down. She went to Goswami Maharaj, another godbrother of Prabhupada and Sridhar Maharaj, and took second initiation. So he was he had no ambition. If you have an ambition to make disciples, you have to be very careful. Is this ambition to make disciples really for the good of others and a necessity that I'm being called to rise to the occasion of, or is there something in me that wants to have a follower? Na dhanam, na janam, na sundarim, kabitam va. This is Sharanagati, this is Ruchi. This kind of person who has no desire for any following, that kind of person can initiate, because that kind of person cannot be controlled by the disciples. If you want disciples, and there's any material side to that desire, if you will, then you're subject to being controlled by them. Sridhar Maharaj was not like that. He was very independent. No one could control him, but he was like completely submissive. Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur and the Dar, the lion of Bhakti Vinod Thakur. I have a little bit of that myself. I'm very independent. No one can control me. They knew me like that in ISKCON. No one could control me. But I was remained completely submissive to Prabhupada. You could put those two things together in my life. So um, I'm blessed in that way. But Sridhar Maharaj was like that even more, what I want to say. And so he, he didn't just go to Navadvip and look around for some land and raise some money. He went to Ek Chakra, which is within the Gautamandala, circle of Gaura's manifest pastimes, where Nityananda Prabhu appeared. And he thought, if I want to live in Navadvip, I have to get the permission of Nitai. Arako Benyitai Chande Karana Hoive. Sangsara Asamano Kodetu Chahole. Now what I'm saying. So with his blessing, freed from material desire, then you can take up real residence in the Dham. And so he prayed there to Nityananda Prabhu to become a resident of Navadvip. And he's told us that he got the impression in his heart, that Nityananda replied, that yes, you want my mercy, but you don't give your mercy to anyone. So he was not giving initiation to anyone, although he was eminently qualified, even in the eyes of his other godbrothers, some of whom were initiating. This was, quite long before Prabhupada's campaign began. But some of the other disciples of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, sannyasis, had been initiating. As I said, he sent Baba Tarini, Prabhupada's sister, to another godbrother. So he thought, given the impression that he got from Nitai Chand, he thought, okay, so he wants me to initiate. He made a deal with me. If I will give my mercy to initiate, then I can live in the Dham. So he thought, okay, but I'm not going to run here, there, and everywhere to collect people. But if people come to me, I won't turn them down. Was his idea. So he had a very internal orientation at that time, and earlier in his life too, I should say. I mean, he did what was necessary and asked of him by Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur in terms of participating in the growth and development of the Gaudiya Math and its 64 branches. He was active at the branch in along the banks of the Godavari, which is one of his favorite places, where Ramananda Samvad, his favorite section of Chaitanya Charitamrita, took place, the conversation between Ramananda Roy and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He was active, I believe, in the Madras Math. I think he founded with someone else the Madras Math, got the donation from the king there for that property. That's a very nice story. How he negotiated with the secretary of the king. And perhaps in Kurukshetra also. So he was active in that sense, but still introverted by nature, internal. He was asked first, or was suggested by Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, that he would be chosen to go to the West, because Saraswati Thakur said, because I know he can never be converted. And Pujabhat Sridhar Maharaj was willing to go, but he just very submissively made a appeal to Saraswati Thakur that I think there might be others amongst us who are more qualified than me. I'm not very outgoing, dealing with the public. It's not so much my temperament. And others amongst us speak better English than me, too. And number three, I don't know how much longer you're going to be here. And if I could stay closer to you, I think I could take advantage of that. And Saraswati Thakur was apparently charmed by that, especially the last statement, and sent someone else to Europe. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur himself felt that Sridhar Maharaj was eminently qualified, but he himself felt less qualified. So he was. This was his nature, and with the help then of Bhakti Pragyan Keshav Maharaj, whose Math is the Devananda Gaudiya Math next door to Sridhar Maharaj's, some land was purchased in Koladweep, Aparad Panjan, the place where Devananda Pandit, who made an offense, was rectified, where the Bhagavatam was being spoken. So that place is a good place to go to overcome Vaishnava Aparad. He was living there. And he made his that his place of residence in Navadvip, and it was so there, compared to the apartment in Calcutta that Prabhupada provided, it was rather austere. He didn't have any brahmacharis out raising funds or anything like that. He was living in Navadvip as a sadhu and doing bhajan. And if someone came, he would initiate. Um, uh, I should say that I think that in the course of that, there may have been some back and forth between living in Calcutta and the Mahat, and he initiated Govinda Maharaj and maybe one or two others, something like that. But eventually there was enough facility, limited as it was, to actually permanently reside there in Navadvip. And it was an austere situation. I mean, Govinda Maharaj told me that it was so austere sometimes that his mind was difficult to control. His mind, he wanted to leave. There wasn't enough rice to go around. Govinda Maharaj told me that he used to go to the trees in the dam and they asked permission to leave, but none of them would give him permission, so he stayed. Just by the, I mean, he wanted to stay, but by the force of the austerity of the situation that their Guru Maharaj was living in, that, they were living on his revenants, so it was difficult. And Srila Maharaj composed a poem, the poem about the flag of the Chaitanya Saraswat Matas rise high, circling all over the world. And they were scratching their heads, those Buddhists, what's he talking about? It's all over the world, the banner of the Chaitanya Saraswat Mat, we're barely getting by here. But no complaints from Pujapad Sridhara Maharaj. Wholesale dedication, and he, I think he said he built the Mat on this rock, Govardhan Shila. Eventually the deities came and so forth, but gradually, it developed with more disciples, and it's worth pointing out that while Sridhar Maharaj was very, very generous, I found him to be patient. The way he would answer questions, listen, try to understand the question, and answer it comprehensively, and even if the question was not that good, and compassionate. He was very compassionate to me. I saw that readily. How he felt about ISKCON and its breakup and so forth. It brought him to tears. And he was also very, broad in his thinking, a lot of gray, he wasn't black and white. So very kind of liberal-minded, generous, and so forth, but very strict. The two contrasting and very strict. Heavy. He was a heavy guru, very heavy. And he had a very strong sense that the guru is the representative of Krishna. Krishna is an autocrat. His mission was not a democracy. It was a benevolent autocracy, and he would drill this point home to us, and appropriately so. And it's a very important point, actually. Today I see that there's more, given the world and the access that people have to the world's goings on and so forth through the internet and so forth. I see a democratization, if you will, of Guru Tattva, making its way into Gaudiya Vaishnava circles, which serves to relativize the figure of the Guru, the institution of the Guru, and take away from this autocratic sensibilities that Sridhar Maharaj very much I felt was very important to keep intact. Um, um, and for good reason, but for the moment, if you will, you hear things like, oh, there needs to be transparency here. There shouldn't be any censorship, free speech. These are all buzzwords, that pertain to, democracy, if you will. And we appreciate that in a worldly sense because an autocrat, a despot, a dictator in this world is very, unpopular because they're not benevolent. So if you put the two together, I think you'll find this is the ideal form of government, a benevolent dictatorship, a benevolent autocracy. But when we hear autocracy and democracy, for example, in the United States here, is being threatened by autocratic sensibilities. And of all people, one of the most unbecoming people has been the main figure, the previous president, that kind of autocrat would be just like terrifying, if you will, to live under. And many feel that, so forth. So that, with the push back, if you will, against that in the world, and then the democratic sensibilities that make sense in a worldly sense, where there is not a benevolent, dictator. There's not a Ram. We can call for Ram Raja, but we need a Ram. That's the problem. We need a Ram. It needs to be a truly benevolent person. So the eroding, if you will, of the guru principle, where the gurus, some people go through the externals of being a guru, which is not that hard to do. Takes a little expertise, but they don't have the substance then that shows up in time. So that's a problem. That erodes, and then you have the worldly sensibilities come in to rectify it and so forth, but it does away with the whole principle. We are, all of us, finite jivas. Krishna, God. I mean, a little bit of awe and reverence is required. We're nothing. Whatever he wants to do with us, free hand. We have no. Pujapad Sridhara used to say, in the American Revolution, of course, the British were taxing the American colonists, the colonies, but the colonies had no representation in the government. So they made the claim, no taxation without representation. And on with the revolution. Sridhara used to use that and say, taxation will be there without representation, no representation and full taxation. That's what we're teaching. That's what Goloka is. That we have no right, nothing, no right to call for justice. That is a big mistake in Gaudiya Vaishnavism. We're waiting only for mercy. If someone goes ahead of us, or Krishna abuses us, what does Radharani say? Chaitanya Mahaprabhu speaks the last verse of Shikshastakam, and Krishna says, Radharani spoke this verse, Asli Shiva Padratam Panashtamam, Adarshanam Mam Mamahatam Karotu Va, Tata Tava Vidatu Lampato, but Pranamat, Tusaiva Napa. He's a lumpet. This is what he's like. He does whatever he wants, and he's my Lord life after life, birth after birth. Nothing can, whether he embraces me or he tramples me, it makes no difference. This is an important. This is a metaphysical reality. We need to be, as to underscore our spiritual practice and conceptual orientation to Gaudiya Vaishnavism, and a guru in an institution has the role of, kind of helping us to learn that, taking, people, souls, atmas have been going in a completely different direction. I mean, people want freedom, and and Pujapad Sridhara would say, and we're teaching slavery. Need some explanation here, but that's what we're teaching: divine slavery. That's what it's about. These, whatever it takes to get that in place is important, and he very much embodied that the way he ran the mission. He was very, very strict, and he could be like a thunderbolt. I mean, I remember when one of our governors asked if he could marry one of the ladies from living in the moth, and Sridhar Maharaj said, "Leave this moth immediately and never return." Wow. Everybody in the audience trembling, and he, but later he was allowed to come back. It was rectified, but he was very heavy like this. He was very strong in the way he conducted himself as the guru figure. He had, for example, no GBC. He was against the GBC idea. I mean, his godbrother next door, in Devananda Gaudiya Math, Bhakti Pragyan Keshav Maharaj, had a GBC, and he had a way of organizing that. I mean, in other words, what's the role of the GBC and what's the role of the guru? Because he had a successor, Keshav Maharaj, and then he had a GBC. So the GBC was supposed to be like dealing with relative matters, and then the guru would be absolute in terms of the final decisions on Siddhanta and so forth. But Sridhar Maharaj, he had no GBC. He absolute autocrat. It was the way he showcased the role of the guru. And as I'm saying, I think it's a very important philosophical point. I see this democratization. You get these sites on Facebook like progressive Vaishnavism. Progressives in the American term, Western term, politically, would not find that site very progressive. And Vaishnavas on the other side, who strictly follow and are embracing the kind of concepts I'm putting out here, wouldn't find it to be Vaishnav either. So it's some other thing. I don't know what it is. I mean, I was invited to join it some years ago, so I went along with it. Every now and then I put a comment there, but I see there an example of this kind of democratization of relativizing something that's meant to be an autocratic system, benevolent and autocratic. So an important point, and he very much embodied that in the way he set an example as the guru of Chaitanya Saraswati Math. And of course, all of us in our Sangha here, we have a very a close relationship with Sridhar Maharaj. If we understand this Sangha practically, obviously we have a close relationship with Prabhupada. We wouldn't be here without Prabhupada. And Prabhupada is my Diksha Guru. I follow him internally and externally. Sridhar Maharaj is equal influence on me as my Siksha Guru, but the connection that our Sangha has with Sridhar Maharaj is very, very significant, and all of you should think about it, contemplate it, and try to bring yourselves to that in closer connection with him, and the kind of things that I'm speaking about him. Go read Sri Guru and His Grace again, on Tuesday, which is the actual day of his appearance, for example. We're talking about him as a guru figure. That is an electrifying book. It was especially electrifying at the time that he wrote it, given the circumstances that surrounded its being published and so forth. But what I'm talking about in terms of our connection with it is that this Sangha, I built this Sangha. You know what I built it with? Broken faith. That's what I built. That's what I had. I was given broken faith to build this Sangha with. And I took it because that's what Sridhar Maharaj asked me to do. Pujapad Sridhara asked me, I asked him, what service can I do, Maharaj? He said, Swami Maharaj has told you everything. Go and preach. Do relief work now. Do relief work. So much broken faith is there. Do relief work. And I'll be in the background. And if somebody, you can't capture their faith entirely, then you can bring that person, to me. But you go do and focus on relief work. That was not my focus in ISKCON. There was no need for relief work. What he meant by relief work was dealing with people who had been, ISKCON was in disrepair in terms of its spiritual leadership. The authenticity of its spiritual leadership after the passing of Prabhupada came into question considerably, and so forth. So that's what he's referring to. And at least 90% of our Sangha is made up of devotees coming with broken faith. So I built this Sangha with the sticks and stones and broken faith. That's what I didn't have a full stick. I had broken bricks. I had to put the bricks back together and then put them in place with other bricks together, glued together, to try to build a temple. And I've done that because Pujapad Sridhara Maharaj asked me to do that. It's easier to go and create some new faith and talk about not as deeply about Gaudiya Vaishnavism, more externally as it would pertain to new people and so forth, gather greater numbers, and so on and so forth. And lots of doubts. I mean, what I went through to help so many devotees, both Prabhupada's disciples of other gurus who had given up their service and so forth. It's built. This song is built on broken faith, and that's not easy to do. It's easy to destroy faith, but it's very difficult to build it at all. What to speak of? The first cut is the deepest. It's deep. It's difficult. So I did it, and I continue to do that because Pujapad Sridhara Maharaj asked me to do that. That's my authorization for being here in this role. He authorized me and asked me to do it in a particular way. So it's been my focus. Other 5%, 90% is other 5% is brand new people. The other 5% is people who know me from previous lives. Are here to continue to go forward with such a mission. So I have to say, I think Pujapad Sridhara Maharaj is pretty pleased with what I've been able to do, and those of you who helped and cooperated as your faith has been repaired. I think we have, in the eyes of the public, the general public, the community of devotees, a robust and faithful, committed community, and we offer it today at the lotus feet of Pujapad Sridhara Maharaj on the day of his appearance. He was very, very kind to me, and he liked me, and told me as much. I remember when I after I had gone out with his blessing and initiated some disciples. I used to go, during Gaur Purnim and then again go at Kartik, right, to the Math. And so I came back to the Math with my first, 3 or 4 disciples. I had to bring them to see Srila Maharaj. So, he was very generous with them, with me, and then my birthday is the day before Gaur Purnim, so somebody pointed out to Guru Maharaj. So he organized, but there should be a celebration. It should be done like this. It should be honored and so forth. At that time, he had a separate property next door called the Land of Nectar. He called it, right? So he asked that it would be performed there and so forth. So he was very kind to me, very generous to me, and I'm very blessed to have been given the service that he gave me. And it again is to be underscored as a special connection that we have with Pujapad Sridhar Maharaj's mission. I don't know if anyone else he particularly told that do relief work. I think I particularly focused on it from what I can tell. As I say, about 90% of you come from broken faith situations. So is there anyway a few thoughts about Pujapad Sridhar Maharaj's life, his contribution, how he came into our lives, and so forth. Dr. Rakshak Dev, Goswami Maharaj ki jai, Chaitanya Saraswati Mat ki jai, and that flag is flying all over the world. His first disciples couldn't figure out what's he talking about. Well, he had some vision. We'll go all over the world, right? And he didn't have to go anywhere. That was something that Prabhupada wanted. You don't move. You stay put and comfortable, and I'll do all the work. When Prabhupada invited him to Mayapur to oversee the installation of the Anantasesh deity for the big temple of understanding, or whatever they call it now, that big temple that they're building, well, Prabhupada called Sridhar Maharaj to oversee the installation of the Anantasesh deity, which goes into the foundation. And Sridhar Maharaj came over, they had lunch. Prabhupada greeted him in his Gamsha. Sridhar Maharaj, who had such intimate relationship. And they took lunch, and after lunch, Prabhupada asked Sridhar Maharaj to take rest in my bed. And then Prabhupada went down to perform the function. Afterwards, Govinda Maharaj said, Swami Maharaj, I was wondering, you asked Guru Maharaj to come here and perform the function, but then you did it while he slept in your bed. How do I understand that? And Prabhupada said, oh, he came. That means he gave his blessing. So it was done. I just carried out the work. I did not want him to have to carry out the work. So Prabhupada wanted Sridhar Maharaj to go all over the world. He tried to bring him to Mayapur, that everybody could come there. That didn't happen for different reasons. But the flag of the Chaitanya Saraswati Mat is flying all over the world, and largely through Prabhupada's disciples, who heard the beginning, heard the end, and understood everything in between what he said about Pujapad Sridhar Maharaj, and they got confirmation by going there. He is very capable, and things he says will cause you to faint. And so here we are. We're an extension of that, and as such, if you will, the flag flies here in all of our places, in Brighton, the Sangha there, I can see here at Adari, in Madhavan, in Bulgaria, in Poland, North Carolina, Kansas, all places. So Pujapad Sridhar Maharaj, Bhakti Rakshak ki jai, great protector, Rakshak, Bhakti Rakshak. Oh, I could go on about his name and everything, but we'll save that for another day. Thank you all for the time listening on this auspicious occasion, and we'll stop there. I hope to be with you next week. Next week, I think I'll be in North Carolina, but I think it will. Is it?
I think so. I mean,
I go there on the 20th. I don't know. Today was what, the 16th? So yeah, I'll be there.
Yeah.
I think we broadcast the talk from there as well. Hopefully we'll be able to take questions. We haven't taken questions for a couple of weeks now. So hopefully we'll do that then. Thank you for your patience in that regard and your presence. Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. Gaur Premanande. Haribo.
Thank you. And I will just make some announcements before we go. So we're just flying out here to North Carolina on the 20th, and then also on the 20th, which is Thursday, Manan Mohan is going to give class. So that's what's happening. And I guess that it seems like the first class Rudy was giving is on the 21st on Friday in Chapel Hill, which I guess will be broadcast. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate it. Okay, Haribo. And then I'll stay on Grunishta. Actually, Grunishta, would you be fine if I just like took 5 minutes to just kind of like recuperate? Would that be okay? Oh, I can't hear you.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe we can call back to the same chat room or something. Oh, this channel.
Okay, so just like get off and then get back on in
Yeah.
like 5 minutes or so. Okay,
Yeah,
cool. That
even
sounds
10,
good.
whatever you need. I'm not in a rush.
Actually, yeah, let's just do 10.
Yeah, or 15,
yeah.
whatever.
Okay, we'll just 10. I'll be back. I'll be back in 10.
Okay.
Okay.
Sounds
Do you need 15? If you need 15,
no,
that's
no,
cool.
I'm fine. I'm fine.
Okay, we'll just do 10.